heat in the ankles. So immediately when your horse gives a frame like this, it's a resting pose. Also, this jog, as I call it actually plup plup, is very important. It might be boring to stand there for 10, sometimes I do it 20 minutes. But what's happening is her lactic acid built up from all that stuff in her core muscles. And so they warmed up, and now the oxygen, it's important for the oxygen to transfer in the blood before you put your horse away. Because then you won't have tie-ups, and then you won't have muscles with knots in them. And that's why I kind of call it the plup plup trot. It's almost like the original old-fashioned cowboy trot, but if you were on these reins, you'd see that she's as light as a feather, very slow. Even though I have in slow motion, she's not trotting quickly, and it's more of a bouncing ball over the ground. She's not having to reach under herself and push off for that trot. She's just sort of bouncing over the ground. And in the olden days, not today because they've aesthetically changed it, but in the olden days of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, that's why the quarter horse had that low jog and that low lope. I mean, if there were a road from the East Coast to California, you could jog this low jog, and I'm not including mountains and rocks, and never take anything out of your horse, because it's almost like they're a pendulum. And that back is just sort of bouncing up and down, and it's the pendulum underneath being the hind legs, and then the forearm and forelegs are reacting to that back pumping. So they're not actually having to use the legs. It's just sort of a pendulum effect. It's a really neat thing, and I think it's what the Europeans, Swiss and Germans were doing when they had in the test going up the ladder to have the horse on the buckle. It wasn't to see if the horse would run off. It was to see if the horse had self-balance, relaxation, come from the upper frame to the lower frame, and not only self-balance, but just propelling themselves over the ground in that pendulum-like thing. In 5 days or so, she'll be doing this in the canter too. And the canter is the same thing, long, low, and it's like water over a round rock. And their whole body, from the dock of their tail all the way to your inside rein, it's just sort of fluffing over the ground. And later on in Naj's career, or as she gets fitter, I'll be doing the more articulate a la dressage exercises, and then I go in between those exercises as the horse gets fitter and more focused mentally towards the training mode. This here in the long working walk in the canter I'll go back and forth, because as the upper positions get lactic acid buildup, you see the horse's eye change, you see the frame start changing ever so slightly, and then you ask them for this frame and they immediately go in it. It's like a best friend of theirs, and then you do 2, 3, 4 minutes of it, depending on where your horse is fitness wise, and then you go back up to the more demonstrative, collected push off from behind over the loins up through the neck, passing to track and all that, and then you go back and forth. So inevitably, with a pretty fit horse, you can be out there easily 45 minutes and do a lot more than you would think possible, because it all sort of works together, and the horse mentally and physically doesn't get sick, sore, or sour. So with this lovely jog here, we want to inevitably have in the next coming weeks her head and neck on the circle. Again, this is the right hind who's the conductor of her body, so every now and then I have to help her keep that pendulum fluffy, plup plup, by canter bending a little bit to the left. To the right, you'll see that I don't have to do it very much. And they really enjoy it when you keep those haunches square. Once they understand what you're doing and helping them, they don't resent it at all, because they can really, really relax. And again, in this plup plup form, it also gives you heads up of how when you're on a really good gallop on a horse, on a good track that has consistent footing, this and those types of gallops, the thoroughbred gets almost hypnotic. I know that's hard for a lot of people to believe, but they do. They fall asleep in a certain zone and let their body do the working, and their whole mind gets the opposite of what has been a lot of times PR'd out there by the thoroughbred breed. They get so relaxed and hypnotic, and their breathing is in rhythm with the gallop and or stride, and it's really remarkable. That's why, again, footing is very, very important. The more consistent, less treacherous footing that you have for any type of horse is going to produce a lot more of a relaxed horse. Horses don't like to fall over. Horses don't like to slip and slide, and then think, oh gosh, when am I going to slip and slide again? When they're a little bit more further along, mature-wise, they don't mind it because they're more balanced and they understand your aids, and they have a more understanding of their own motor mechanics. But they certainly, on the young ones, well, on this filly, her reaction to lack of footing, if she hits a spot, is more like the cat you have at home that did a mistake coming off a chair or a table and lands funny, and they get, like, I did that on purpose, and then they do this show-off buck or whatever. Some horses of lesser breeding, or put it to you this way, lesser class, or perhaps not as balanced conformationally speaking over the ground, they get frightened or nervous. And so you'll see their eye get worried, because now you set the tone of, oh my gosh, I might fall down again, you know. A happy horse is a balanced horse, physically balanced. More times out of 10, people teach their horses to stop at jumps, because when they go to the jump, the horse isn't balanced. They're just going to the jump. If a horse is balanced going to a jump, you will take it, unless it has something that has been taught in the past, and or doesn't like jumping because it had a bad experience from whatever. It could be a nervous rider, or unbalanced to a jump, gets too deep, whatever, and says, I don't like that, I'm not going to do that anymore, and then they figure out cunning ways to avoid jumping. Racehorses do the same thing. If they haven't had a good time on the racetrack mentally, and you sort of hope that they don't have any big deal when they're young, certainly the first 3 times to a track, you set the tone. But horses are like elephants. They remember all the good and all the bad. And depending on their sense of humor and personality and character, and depending on the rider and how the rider and or trainer reacts to the good and the bad, then your horse interprets, and you set the tone in your horse's library of the bell rings and they salivate, a la Pavlov's dog. Thank you very much. See you next time.